Hi, and welcome back. I came across this photo online, and I just felt the need to build a model of it. This is a freight house on the Connecticut River Railroad in Northampton, Massachusetts. I just fell in love with this photo of the broken brick wall and the cribbing put up to secure the building. Now that's the only photo that I've found of this freight house, but I did find it on a couple of insurance maps. It's on the Connecticut River Railroad, which was taken over a little while later by the Boston and Maine Railroad. The photo seems to be from the turn of the 20th century, and these maps give me a good indication of the platform that went around it. As for the damaged wall, my thinking is that since there's a siding there, a car must have gotten away and run into the building and smashed all the brick. So to prepare for modeling it, I ordered some materials from Monster Model Works. I love their brick walls. Then I started making measurements from the photo as best as I could, and I made a small mock-up just to see what size I was going to be dealing with, and this was in HO scale. Once I was pretty confident on my measurements, I started transferring them to the brick material. I had gotten 1/32, which is pretty thin, but I wanted to have 2 layers of brick where the brick wall was broken. And Monster's brick material has an orientation, so I marked it to keep the right side up. And I marked where I was going to have my broken wall. And also there was one door that I was going to use in this building. I started marking out where I was going to put all of my bracing, and then started gluing my bracing in place. Being a very thin material, I ended up using more than usual. And I also marked out on some scribe siding where the broken wall was going to be, and then cut out the scribe siding to represent the cribbing. Then I started cutting out the broken portion of the brick wall. You can tell in the photo that there's 2 layers of bricks, so I was going to use 2 layers of brick wall to represent that. So I cut out broken portions on both of them, and then glued them together to get that layered look. And I started cutting out the other window and door openings in all of the other walls. Now of course the back wall I had to assume looked like the front wall since I don't have a picture of it. And for the other end I decided to go ahead and put a window and a door in there. Now going back to my broken wall, I cut the window opening and then checked to see how it would look against the scribed wood that I was using for the cribbing. Then I started gluing on Monster's brick corners, and they work very well for joining 2 walls together and hiding the seam. And once I started assembling the building, I found that I was going to need a center wall to give the structure support. So I cut it out and started gluing the building together. Once I had 2 walls and the center support in place, I glued the 3rd wall on. Then I test fit the end wall with the cribbing in place, but I only glued the brick wall. I didn't glue the cribbing in yet because I knew I was going to have to paint the bricks. Then it was time to start working on the platform. I drew out the outline of my building on a piece of scrap cardboard to see what size my platform was going to be. And I started getting my strip wood together for this. And I found out roughly what pieces I was going to need. Then I turned my attention to painting the brick. I tried a variety of different red colors and mortar looks. I ended up going with this primer color, but as you'll find later, that wasn't what I ended up with. So I started building the framing for my platform, and using my Ultimation sander and slicer made it very easy, and it went very quickly. I like gluing these on a silicone mat. The glue doesn't stick to it. And I have a short video showing how to use a silicone mat for gluing. Building the framing went very quickly, and then once I had it all done, it was time to go back and change what I was going to do with the paint color. I had trouble getting a mortar look that I liked when I had painted the building red. So I tested painting it white and using some Copic markers to get the red look, and that came out better. So I went back and put a white primer over the building, and then started using a couple different Copic markers to go over the surface of the brick. And these make it easy to do. I first used a lighter red, and then came back with a darker red and went over most areas of it, which gave it the kind of blotchy look that bricks have. Then after test fitting it in my platform frame, I started working on the windows and doors. These were just made from scribe siding. And I painted the door frames a kind of rusty metal look, and then glued the windows and the doors in place. The windows seemed to be just wooden framing. I'm not sure if they were shutters, but I glued all of these pieces in place. Then once they were dry, I went ahead and glued the cribbing wall in place so my structure was complete. And then I cut out the base for the diorama it was going to sit on out of foam core. And I started working on the supports for the platform. And this was just a matter of cutting out many little legs and feet. And using the repeater on my sander made them all exactly the same size. I used a variety of stains depending on if they were going to be on the outside or the inside. Most of them got a creosote look. Then once they were dry, I started gluing them onto my platform, making sure that each one was perfectly vertical. And I had also put a couple of supports across the platform that were going to actually hold the building. And this was just a matter of gluing all of the support posts in place. And then I started working on the cross bracing for the supports. And again, this went pretty quickly. And there were a couple of support posts that had brick pilings under them. So I added those, then went ahead and painted the base, and then glued my platform supports and platform onto the base and let the glue dry. Now I started working on some brick pilings that were going to go underneath the building as if they were supporting the actual freight house. And I cut these to size and glued them in strategic places around the inside of the building and even on some of the platform supports to look as if they were supporting the building and holding it up. And I glued a piece of track onto my base that was going to represent the siding that ended at the building. And I also painted a different color onto the frame of my door before putting it in place. Then I started cutting out strips of styrene. They were going to represent the stonework above and below the windows and door. I put a base khaki color on them and then dry brushed on a little Vallejo concrete to give them a look of stone. And I started working on a set of stairs that you could barely see in the photograph. And then once I put them in place, I went ahead and stained them to match the platform. Now it's time to start putting some dirt texture down onto my base. I used a couple of different woodland scenic materials for the base of this texture. I used soil underneath the building and then dirt around the outside underneath the platform. And I just wiped on some glue and then sprinkled this on and let it dry. I did a little bit of painting on the tracks to make them look aged and worn, and put a little bit of rust on them before I started putting all of the dirt down in that area. Then I glued down cinders in the area around the rail, held it in place with glue. I started working on the pile of bricks that you could just see the top of in the photo. I carved a piece out of foam and then covered it with AK rough terrain. Then I said, well, I'm going to have to cover this with bricks. Well, I still had plenty of pieces of wall that had lots of bricks, so I cut out a lot of bricks. I wasn't sure how this was going to work, but I went ahead and started gluing them in place. So I went through my strip wood to pick a size of the decking for the platform. Once I picked one, I used a little math to see how much of it I was going to need. And I test fit a couple pieces to see what they looked like. Then I went through a couple stain colors to see what I was going to use, and I picked a couple. Then I started staining the pieces of wood that were going to be used for the decking. And then once they were dry, I started cutting them down to the length I needed. After I had a big pile of wood for the decking, I went ahead and glued the structure in place on the platform and the supports that I had made for it. Once that was dry, I started gluing my decking in place, making sure the first one was square, and then just working my way back from that, using the variety of different shades that I had stained. And I worked my way all around the building, just from one end to the other. Then I went back to my pile of bricks, and I glued some more onto it, and it was starting to look like a pile of bricks. But I went ahead and added some red stain to it to get rid of all of the white areas that were showing. Then I started working on the roof. I cut the roof out of 1/16 inch basswood and then painted the underside of it. And then for the top side, I went ahead and started drawing lines. And I was going to use rail scale shingles on this. I started applying their 3-tab shingles following the lines that I had drawn on it. And this progressed pretty quickly as well. I like his shingles quite a bit. And I got both halves of the roof done pretty quickly. And I went back to the base. I wanted to put real dirt over the Woodland Scenics foam I had put down. So I have some very fine dirt from the backyard, and I just sprinkled and glued it down. Then I went ahead and started gluing the roof onto the building. First on one side, then on the other. And once that was dry, I started working on the telephone pole that was obvious in the picture. And I just built this out of a dowel and some pieces of strip wood. For the insulators, I cut off the tips of toothpicks and glued them in place. Then I stained the telephone pole a creosote color, and then went over the whole thing with a brown stain and painted the insulators a green color. The photos showed some roof support brackets, so I made them out of a couple pieces of strip wood. Then I cut them down to size and glued them in place underneath the roof after staining them. And I finished up by building a railing for the steps. You could just see the top of the railing in the photo, so I'm not exactly sure what it looked like. But this is close enough, and it matches the top that's in the photo. I went ahead and added a little man on mine because I had a figure that was going upstairs. Then I finished up my weathering of the building using artist pigments, as I like to do. And even though I had to shorten the building about half of its actual length, I think it came out as a good representative of what the photograph covered. And I went ahead and put some articles on the deck, even though there weren't any in the photograph. But it makes it look like it's more used. I had a lot of fun scratch building this, and I think I matched the photo the way that I wanted to. Thank you for watching.